More than 4 million Nicaraguans are called to the polls this Sunday for the general elections. Thousands of protesters are planned worldwide to demand cuts in fossil fuel use and immediate help for poor communities affected by climate change. The United States deployed a military convoy of at least 26 vehicles loaded with arms in an illegally occupied base in Syria. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Welcome back. The Nicaraguan people are preparing for a paramount event in their Republican history. From the early hours of this Sunday morning, the voting centers will open to decide who will lead the government during the next 5 years. More than 4.34 million Nicaraguans over 16 years of age are summoned to the polls to exercise their right to vote in elections that come after attempts by the opposition to plague the country with chaos and violence in 2019 and also during the impact of almost 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. 3,106 voting centers and 13,459 polling stations make up the basis of the voting system and the validation of the Electoral Act. The polling day will be held under strict biosecurity protocols and under the guidance of the Supreme Electoral Council. In addition to the next presidential formula that will rule the destinies of the country until 2027, 92 deputies to the National Assembly and 20 to the Central American Parliament will be elected. Let's watch a short clip on the voting guidelines.
Polling centers must open at 7 a.m. and close at 6 p.m. local time. The voter shall look for the polling center corresponding to him or her. The list of voters for each polling center in alphabetical order must be posted on the wall. It is not allowed to enter the polling center with cell phones, cameras, and other electronic devices, nor drunk or armed people. According to the electoral law, if the person does not appear registered in the list of the board, but his or her identity card has the address of that precinct, the voter can cast his or her vote. If he or she voted there in the last elections and has not changed his or her address, he or she is allowed to cast the ballot as well. First, the voter presents his or her identity card, valid or expired, or a legal document that replaces. Photocopies are not admitted. The Supreme Electoral Council has the obligation to deliver to the voter his or her identity card or a supplementary document. If the person does not have it, he or she must go to the nearest electoral center to request it. The voter will have one ballot to mark his or her choice for president, vice president, departmental deputies, national deputies, and deputies to the parliament. The voter must review the ballot well before marking it. The voter does not have a definite time limit to do so. The voter must mark only in the blank circle of his or her preference. At the end of the voting process, the voter must return to the voting table to have the fingers marked. At that time, he or she should request the identity card or supplementary document before leaving the polling station.
Telesur English will accompany this event and provide you with more details in a special coverage, so stay tuned. Now we go to Argentina, where the electoral race for the legislative elections of November 14th is underway. The electoral coalitions are speeding up the last campaign activities in view of the legislative elections to be held on November 14th. The final acts of the electoral campaign, with the ruling party front of all, will take place on Thursday, November 11th, in areas of the Nestor Kirchner Park. The closing of the campaign of the opposition, grouped in Together for Change, is also scheduled for that same Thursday, before the beginning of the so-called electoral closing period, which starts on Friday 12th. Some 34 million voters are summoned to the polls on November 14th to define 107 of the 255 seats in the Chamber of Deputies and 24 of the 72 seats in the Senate. In Ecuador, the Constitutional Guarantees Commission of the National Assembly determined that President Guillermo Lasso violated the law by registering his candidacy, given that he has assets in tax havens. The Parliamentary Commission approved this Friday the report on the investigation made to Guillermo Lasso for the so-called Pandora Papers. The document determines that Lasso did not respect the Ethical Pact of 2017, which prohibits public and the elected officials to have accounts in the so-called tax havens. The Commission requested the plenary of the legislative branch to verify this violation of the Ethics Pact and suggested that President Lasso appear before the National Assembly in a maximum period of 8 days to explain his situation. Meanwhile, the Ecuadorian government issued a communique to reject the content of the report and warned that the Commission had disrespected due process and that its action lacked legal validity. Bolivia's government advances a 12-point agreement with the families of the victims of the 2019 coup d'etat to promote the application of justice. The Vice Minister of Citizen Security, Roberto Rios, informs that the document will be evaluated on November 25th, includes demands for medical and psychological attention for the emotional damage, housing and credits. The human rights representative of Del Alto, David Inca, highlighted the attention given by the government of Luis Arce to other demands regarding work, scholarships and subsidies for the relatives of the Sacaba victims. He also assured that there are still pending points, such as the consolidation of the soft credit plan, an aspect of which there will be clarifications in the next few days. He also informs that they are planning a meeting with the Plurinational Legislative Assembly. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. These days in Cuba, many debates surround the 22nd version of the new Families Code of Law, a project that seeks to replace the current legislation, which dates back to 1975. Among the problems the new code attempts to tackle, there is the acknowledging of all forms of family and how to guarantee their rights in society. A more detailed scope on it thanks to our correspondent in Havana, Lisandra Andres.
Dachelis Valdez and Hope Bastian seem to be comfortable with interviews. Their story went viral when they both managed to be recognized as Paulo's mothers in the child's birth certificate in Cuba.
We have a common project. We have both been working on it from the beginning and we follow through along the way. It's based on mutual understanding and love. Unconditional and unlimited love, that's what's most important in a family.
Dachelis, a Cuban psychologist, and Hope, an anthropologist from the United States, agreed to assisted reproduction in the United States, for in Cuba, these procedures, like marriage, were only limited by the law to heterosexual couples.
We were looking for that sort of legal protection. That's why we decided to go to the United States to deliver, but we came back as soon as we could. We came back to our home and our community here in Havana.
Article 7 of the Cuban Constitution acknowledges the right to form a family in any of its types of constituent arrangements and sees to the superior interest of the child and his or her right to be recognized on the legal record. However, the complementary statutes on the subject don't abide for the diversity of family compositions that exist on the island.
When one thinks of diverse families, you think in families like ours, with 2 moms or 2 dads, but family diversity covers a huge scope.
Psychologist Patricia Ares assures that the Cuban family's composition has changed and that today it is necessary to acknowledge the existence of a broad span of domestic realities, each one with its challenges, demands, and expectations, forming part of the contemporary kaleidoscope.
These changes aren't always sufficiently reflected in the code, so we are talking about loopholes and legal limbos, especially for us psychologists who work with families. There were already existing family realities that weren't taken into account by the law.
Dr. Patricia Ares has also worked as a member of the committees in charge of redacting the Family Code of Law project, device she thinks will help achieve higher levels of integration, equity, and dignity for Cuba's citizens.
The most important thing in a family is its socio-affective ties, and that's why this new code goes beyond or goes across these new existing realities to protect, to cover, to support and reflect and dignify many families' relations. Because we are talking about family diversity, but one must bear in mind that not all families have the same legal legitimacy or visibility.
Meanwhile, Paulo grows as a bicultural boy between Spanish and English. He listens to Bamban, alone to mothers that play with him, read him books, speak mainly about love and acceptance.
We are probably right now the family that most people know because of all of that birth certificate story. But we are not the only one, nor are we the first, nor last. There are people who have been living in that out-of-the-law space, but who are, in spite of that, a family, who have been a family for a truckload of years.
The Shelleys and Hope, Paulo at their side, are already recognized as a family in the eyes of the lawful state in Cuba. They hope that the code is as fair, revolutionary, and all-embracing as Cuban reality demands it to be. Lisandra Andres for Telesur in Havana, Cuba.
Now we address other topics. Thousands of protesters gather in Paris as part of the global climate rallies. The campaigners have protested against what they say is a failure of crunch on UN talks to act fast enough to tame global warming. Dozens of events are planned worldwide to demand cuts in the fossil fuel use and immediate help for communities already affected by climate change, particularly in poorer countries. It is expected up to 50,000 people to parade through the streets of Glasgow.
Today there is a lot of talk, and the COP is really the market for false solutions, in particular through carbon trading rights, but also through everything that is happening at the European Union level, through the games to include nuclear and gas in the so-called clean energies, and therefore eligible for public funding. We are fighting against this.
Thousands of young citizens also march in Glasgow as the United Nations Climate Conference, the COP26, develops in the Scottish city. Activists demanded that it is now being labeled as climate justice, urgent actions by the government and corporations for the communities that are affected by climate change, especially in the most endangered and poor countries in the southern hemisphere. Glasgow police said that they estimated a concentration of around 50,000 people in the convention center, which prompted a huge mobilization of security forces. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The United States deployed a military convoy of at least 26 vehicles loaded with arms in the illegally occupied base in Al Tanif, southeast Syria. Local media informs that the deployment of the convoy on Friday is considered the biggest of the past years, the 26 vehicles being supplied with ammunition, weapons and logistics stock. The increase of U.S. military presence in the Al-Tanf base near the Syrian border with Jordan is constantly denounced by Damascus as an illegal appropriation of a strategic point of the national territory that supports the thief and the insurgent groups which fight against the Syrian army and encourage a climate of hostility in the region. And we go now to Iraq. In the capital, Baghdad, protesters took the streets to show their discontent over the results of the legislative elections effected on October in the country. The protest, at the beginning stage in a pacific tone in front of the Ministry of Planning, took a shift to violence after a few hours. The citizens threw stones against the security forces, who in return repressed the gathering with tear gas and lethal ammunition shots to the air. The Ministry of Health disclosed that at least 125 injured people were taken to hospitals, and local media report that an investigation on the events is underway, whilst asking protesters to exercise the right to protest pacifically. The foreign ministers of Iran and Russia discussed alternatives ahead of the recommencement of negotiations for the return of the nuclear energy joint comprehensive plan of action put in motion in 2018 in Vienna and interrupted due to escalations in the use of coercive measures by the Trump administration on Iran. The foreign ministers of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and Iran, Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, effected talks over the phone on Saturday, when they saw eye-to-eye on the resumption of the nuclear agreement's initial terms, approved by the United Nations Security Council. The diplomats affirmed that this is the only way of guaranteeing the rights and interests of the involved parties. The two officials also went over several topics in the regional and bilateral agenda, among them the situation in Afghanistan and the surrounding countries, as well as the latest events in the Southern Caucasus. Trade union members for Poland's energy sector protested outside the European Union's office in Warsaw on Saturday, blaming the EU's moves to discourage coal use of soaring energy prices. Some 200 power plant and coal mine workers from across Poland blew horns and waved union flags as they chanted. Their campaign slogan was "Yes to Poland's energy sovereignty, no to high energy and heating prices." Trade union leaders say the EU's energy policies will harm Poland's economy. The coal industry is a major employer in Poland, which gets more than half of its electricity from black and brown coal. The government energy policy plan calls for increasing reliance on nuclear energy once the infrastructure is built. Like other EU member nations, Poland has pledged to phase out coal use and to develop wind, solar and other renewable energy sources. At the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow this week, the government said it will not be able to close all coal-fired plants until 2049, a target that disappointed activists.
A much more important issue concerns CO2 emissions trading. Today, a wave of increases is sweeping through the whole of Europe, not only Poland, but all European Union countries. This is what Timmermans and the whole team at the European Commission are responsible for. They are the ones responsible for the rise in energy prices, for the rise in electricity prices, and for the rise in prices of products and services. It is Timmermans and his team.
A massive explosion at a petrol station in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, has killed 92 people. The country's vice president confirmed that information on Saturday. Hospitals were treating 88 more people for severe burns. According to witnesses, the blast happened when a vehicle caught fire at a petrol station after a road accident. The flames then spread, burning people in cars and on roads nearby. The majority of the victims were street vendors and motorcyclists, many of whom were caught in the blaze while trying to retrieve fuel, according to volunteers who were at the scene. Hundreds of people gathered on Saturday morning, many searching for missing relatives under the eye of security forces.
As of yesterday, we transported 87 corpses, and when we get to Connaught, there were 65 patients, and 4 died in our presence. So that took the body count from 87 to 91. And there were some bodies that we could not retrieve because if you watch the video, if you get to the scene, there are rubble around, there are burnt cars, and there are bodies underneath. We cannot retrieve them, one for access and second decency. So we waited until this morning so as to get a final body count of all those affected. But in my fair assessment, I want to believe there are over 200 victims and more. As of yesterday.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.